The possessed reborn baby. The wind howled through the deserted city streets as a shadow loomed over the house. Inside, a harmless figure in its antique wooden crib stared up at the ceiling. It was a reborn baby, one of those incredibly lifelike dolls made to look almost human, with its large, deep-set eyes and soft silicone skin that mimics the texture of real flesh. Yet something was wrong. The woman who bought it, Lúcia, was an enthusiast of the world of reborn babies. She had a collection of hundreds of them, but never ever had one been as vivid as this one. The doll's tiny body was made with eerie perfection, but something made it even more disturbing. Its eyes. They weren't just large and deep-set, they seemed to follow her movements around the room. When Lúcia looked back at it, there was a growing sense that the baby was watching her, as if it knew more than it should. One night, when darkness was taking over the house and a dense silence filled the room, Lúcia sat next to the crib, feeling growing uneasiness. Suddenly, a strange noise cut through the silence, a faint moan coming from inside the crib. She got up quickly, her heart racing, but what she found made her freeze inside. The baby, who had been motionless before, now had his head slightly tilted to the side, and his eyes, those perfect eyes, were fixed on her, but not innocently. It was something deeper, darker. "It's okay, isn't it, my love?" Lúcia murmured, trying to calm the panic that was beginning to take over her chest. But as the hours passed, Lúcia could no longer ignore the strange sensations. At night, the baby seemed to move by himself in the crib, always with his eyes fixed on her, as if he were waiting for something. She tried to convince herself that she was imagining things, but soon the small sounds began to become more evident. Whispers, incomprehensible murmurs, and then the most horrible thing happened. One morning, when the clock struck 3 in the morning, a scream echoed through the house. A scream that did not come from Lúcia's mouth, but rather from something or someone in the crib. Lúcia ran to the room but stopped at the door, frozen in terror. The baby was no longer in the crib. She looked around, her body trembling with fear. That was when she saw him, standing at the entrance to the hallway, with his small hands raised, as if he wanted to touch her. But the most terrifying thing was not the baby's strange position. It was the fact that his eyes were no longer those silicone human eyes. They were black as night, without pupils, completely empty. At that moment, Lúcia knew the baby was no longer a simple doll. Something or someone was inside him. She backed away slowly, but before she could scream, a low, hoarse voice full of hate whispered directly into her mind. "You shouldn't have killed me, officer. Now, I'm coming back to finish what I started." The name was familiar. Lúcia knew that the spirit belonged to a murderer who had been killed during a police operation years before. She had read about the story, but she had never imagined that he would return in this way. The murderer, named Marcos Silva, had been killed in a shootout, but it seemed that his thirst for revenge was endless. The baby, possessed by Marcos's spirit, seemed to have a single purpose: to avenge his death. And who better to take revenge than the police officer who killed him? Lúcia, who at the time was just a spectator of the tragedy, was now in the line of fire. She, who was not to blame, was now the target. Desperate, she ran to the front door, but was interrupted by a strange sound. The baby's crying. It wasn't just any cry, but a distorted cry, almost like a scream. When she turned around, the baby was there, closer than ever, his eyes now shining with an unearthly intensity. The atmosphere in the house changed. The air became heavy, almost oppressive. Lúcia felt the presence of something evil, something that could not be explained by science or logic. She tried to fight the panic, but she couldn't. The baby, with a macabre smile, began to move towards her. He was heading towards the hallway where she was trapped. "I can't escape." The phrase whispered by the walls seemed to be the voice of Marcus's own spirit, mocking her attempt to escape. Lúcia felt his presence in every corner of the house, as if he were crawling through the shadows. She picked up her cell phone and called the police. But before she could say a word, the lights went out, plunging her into total darkness. Only the sound of his own heartbeat echoed in the silence, until the voice, now closer, whispered again, "I'm here. You can't hide me. I've come to get you." It was the end, Lúcia thought. She was alone, lost, with the spirit of a murderer, seeking revenge now, in possession of the body of a reborn baby. She no longer knew what was real, what was a nightmare, and what was a curse. She only knew that somehow she had awakened something that should never have been brought to life. And the last thing Lúcia saw was the baby, its empty, cold eyes now radiating a ghostly light, walking toward her. Time passed, but the memory of the possessed baby and the shadow of Marco Silva's spirit never left Lúcia. When the police finally arrived at the house, the scene was chaos. The walls were marked with strange symbols that no one could decipher. And the baby, well, the baby was lying back in the crib, its eyes still. But Lúcia knew. She knew what had happened. She knew that the spirit, the murderer, was alive inside that small, fragile body. She was taken to the hospital, but no one believed the story she told. The trauma had been so profound that even with the doctors trying to do everything they could to help her, Lúcia could no longer distinguish what was real from what was a hallucination. She sank deeper and deeper into an abyss of despair and madness. The nights in the hospital were horrible. She heard the baby crying, felt his presence, Marcos's spirit approaching. With each passing day, the line between the real world and the dark world she was trapped in became more tenuous. The hallucinations, the voices whispering in her mind, and that horrible feeling that the baby was still with her, everything consumed her. Soon, Lúcia was diagnosed with a serious psychological disorder. She was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where her name was lost in the medical records, and her story was muffled by the cold white walls. But the shadows did not abandon her. For weeks, Lúcia remained in a state of extreme agitation. She believed she saw the baby in every corner of the asylum, but no one believed her. Doctors and nurses tried to calm her with sedatives, but Marcos's spirit was still there in her mind, manipulating every thought, every movement, every piece of her sanity. It was on a cold night, when Lúcia was alone in her room, that everything finally connected. The obsession with revenge, the feeling of being persecuted, all of that took shape. Marcos's spirit had managed to connect with her. He possessed her, but he also used her. The spirit did not want her just as a vessel, but wanted her to be the key to his final revenge. Lúcia began to plan her escape. She knew that, inside that asylum, she was surrounded by people who did not believe her story, who saw her as a victim of madness. But she knew that he wasn't just taking revenge on her, but also on the police officer who had killed him. The police officer who had never paid for what he had done. In the dead of night, Lúcia managed to escape. Her mind was immersed in a fog, a mixture of revenge and despair. She knew what she had to do. She knew where the police officer was. He had continued his life as if nothing had happened, while she, who was not to blame, had been dragged into the abyss of madness. Marcos's spirit was with her, guiding him, taking her straight to the police officer who had killed her without knowing that, at that moment, he was also killing a part of himself by letting that spirit take over Lúcia. When she arrived at the police officer's house, the door was ajar, and she entered without hesitation. The police officer was sleeping on the couch, peacefully, without the slightest idea of what was about to happen. Lúcia, with empty eyes and a lost expression, approached him. Marcos's spirit now took over her body completely, controlling her movements and her mind. And it was when she raised the knife in her hands, a knife she had taken from the kitchen, that the policeman woke up. He tried to get up, but the spirit overpowered him before he could react. The sound of something cutting flesh, and the screams that followed echoed through the house. Marcos's spirit had taken revenge, and with it, Lúcia had taken revenge too. The man who had destroyed her life, who had put her in that asylum, was now lying on the floor, lifeless. And in that moment, Lúcia felt free for the first time. She knew that her soul would never find peace again, but somehow she felt that revenge brought a weight of justice that she needed. But in her heart, the question remained, was she the real culprit, or had Marcos's spirit used her like a puppet, consuming everything she was and leaving only an echo of pain and madness? The camera now focuses on Lúcia, with a blank, distant look in her eyes, as she watches the dead police officer in front of her. The smile on her face is unsettling, as if she knows the cycle of revenge hasn't ended. It's just changed direction. So, what did you think of this hair-raising story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying stories like this. Leave your comment below. Which part made you the most nervous? Let's talk about it and share your theories.